Let's talk about The Stand, Stephen King's masterwork, his 1,200-page sort of pseudo maybe masterpiece. In this video, I'm going to talk whether this book is overhyped, whether it's worth the read, whether it's worth the investment. This is the ReReadables, a video series where I talk about books, their rereadability. I give out the awards inspired by Bill Simmons and the Ringer's Rewatchable podcast. I'm going to go through each of our awards. I'm going to talk about the most rereadable scene. I'm going to talk about who won the book, whose apex mountain was this. I'm going to go through all of it in this video. So let's jump right into it. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more of these videos. I'll be talking more iconic books, not just Stephen King's The Stand, but I want to do more Stephen King books. Let me know in the comments what you think the next rereadable book I should review and talk about is. So as always in these videos, we're going to begin with a bit of a refresher on what the plot of Stephen King's The Stand is. So The Stand is a post-apocalyptic novel that follows a virus, a flu-like virus that is released into the world from a military base that ultimately takes out 99.7% of the world's population. A lot of people, everyone's dying. The first entire third of this 1,200-page book is essentially people just dying in brutal ways and following the slow downward trajectory of society and the world. The middle third is sort of everyone picking up the pieces from the fallout of that sort of fall. And the final third is this sort of face-off with two nefarious forces, or the nefarious force known as Randall Flagg, this almost like devil, demon-like figure who is taking hold in Las Vegas and calling the survivors, or who is beckoning some of the survivors to follow him into Las Vegas and help him retake the world in the name of sort of science. Now, on the other side of things, there is this Mother Abigail. She is an elderly African-American woman who lives she takes hold in Colorado, and she's beckoning much of the world to join her in Colorado. And it's sort of this good versus evil battle all taking place after the world falls apart. Now, I begin each of these videos first off with where was I when I first read this. So this was actually a recent read for me. So I didn't reread this book yet. It'd be very difficult for anyone to reread it because it is 1,200 pages. So I recently reread this one within the last month or two. Before that, I had tried on multiple occasions to read The Stand, and I tapped out because it just wasn't pulling me in. But I felt like I had to get this one off my back. It's been on my list for such a long time. It is considered such a seminal text in the world of Stephen King that I felt like I had to read it as someone who has read almost every one of his other popular books. People regard this as maybe his best work, as maybe his masterpiece. I'll have some opinions on that later, but for now I think it's just important to understand. I read this in 2026 after sort of intaking, reading, watching a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction, and I immediately understood why people very often cite this as an instrumental text in post-apocalyptic fiction, in this sort of post-COVID world where a virus takes out a lot of people and the world sort of falls into disarray. It is certainly an interesting text to view through the lens of 2026, and I'm glad that I ultimately did wait to read this after the pandemic especially. Okay, so we got through some of our background on this one. Before I jump into this, because I know that not everyone has read the book, I'm going to be pretty light on the spoilers here until the end where I sort of demark, okay, if you've read the book, if you finished the book, it's important that we check in here. But I'm going to give out awards that will hopefully help guide you whether you've read the book or not, or refresh your memory if you read it a long time ago and you don't need to necessarily recall each and every section. But we begin, as always, with our most rereadable scene. The most rereadable scene is going to be the scene that is obviously most enjoyable to relive or reimagine. And in a book like The Stand, most enjoyable to reread or reimagine is probably going to be something horrible and horrifying, because this isn't a super happy-go-lucky book. You're watching the world fall into disarray. You're watching people die of a terrible, violent illness that is taking over the world and killing lots of people. And in this case, my number one pick for most rereadable scene is going to be Larry Underwood, the musician character who undergoes the transformation of being sort of this selfish jerk to something else throughout the course of this book without getting too spoilery. He has this odyssey through New York City's tunnels, through escaping New York City. He is in Manhattan when the virus itself comes down and gets everyone sick. So he makes an attempt to escape through one of the tunnels. And the passage, the pages, the chapter where he is making that escape are horrifying. He's hearing voices. He is sort of losing it as he's going through this dark, creepy tunnel with bodies all over the place, abandoned cars, all that kind of stuff. Chapter itself is haunting. The vibe overall is as scary as it gets in this book. There's something just about how Stephen King writes these really creepy worlds, really creepy scenes that he just nails, and that's the reason why he's become this sort of auteur of the world of horror. This isn't a horror book per se, but you can see his skills at play, especially in this Larry escapes from New York City scene. By the same token, My second most rereadable scene, or another contender for me, would be Stu, the secondary sort of main character in this book. When he is escaping from a government facility in New Hampshire, the government has cordoned him off as somebody who's been exposed to the virus, and he ultimately makes an escape, sort of a daring escape, from the doctors, from the security guards, and leaves this facility and makes his way out on the road, where he runs into a gentleman named Glenn and his dog, who become more important as the book progresses. But this sort of run-in, he finds Glenn painting on the side of the road, and Glenn is this sociologist professor who has a lot of opinions about what the world will come to now that it's actually ended, what comes next. And Glenn is one of the more interesting characters in the entire book. He's sort of this philosopher in the body of a frumpy, middle-aged man. He's an intellectual, but also kind of a realist in terms of how he views the end of the world itself. The cynicism he has, complemented by the general, I guess, pragmaticism, really helps develop the world of Boulder as that middle third of the book takes hold. And while I don't love the middle third of this book, Stu happening upon Glenn and his trusty dog is just a fun scene. It shows you sort of this odyssey of the American frontier as these people who have been left there after this post-apocalyptic event are left to sort of fend for themselves and find whatever companionship, whatever humanity they can along the way. Next up, best quote. So best quote, very simply, is going to be a standout line from the book that sticks with readers. And for this, I think there's really only one contender to me. So to me, the best quote of the book is a quote from Larry Underwood. Again, this character who undergoes this sort of reformation into a good person in the wake of the apocalyptic event. And he has this quote near the end of the book that I just love, and I think it applies to so much of life in general, so many people's journeys. And that quote is, "No one can tell you what goes on in between the person you were and the person you become. No one can chart that blue and lonely section of hell. There are no maps of the change. You just come out the other side, or you don't." You know, that's Stephen King cooking right there. That's some good work by our horror godfather here. The man is an incredible writer, and I think nobody writes about human beings and America as well as Stephen King, and the way that so much of our psychosis in terms of the American experience is draped up in our idea of who we are and what we achieve. And Larry Underwood is one of those characters, and to see him reshape what he thinks is important in the wake of the world ending, and sort of reinvent himself as a character who can be relied upon by people and who people in the community respect, is an incredible journey, an incredible transformation, and to me, he's probably my favorite character in the book. Okay, let's move on now to what has aged the best from this book. This is an award for what elements of the book have aged the best over the course of time. Now, this book was initially published in, I think, 1978 and then republished in 1990. So this book has seen quite the expedition in terms of what's aged in the story itself. I think what's obviously aged the best here is the idea of a pathogen mutating and basically taking the world to its knees by way of this flu-like infection. It was an idea in 1978 that maybe seems so foreign, but in the world of the post-COVID pandemic, it's impossible not to see that Stephen King really was kind of nailing it. Obviously, we don't have a earthly battle between heaven and hell taking place before humankind, but nonetheless, we certainly have seen how quickly our institutions fail and how troublesome a virus can certainly come in and wipe out many, many people and many, many lives, and the infighting that happens when that is going on. Humans are fallible, humans screw up, and King really nails that element of the story. The idea that a virus essentially breaks our brains, regardless of how deadly it is, and ultimately turns the world into a place where you can't very often trust your fellow man or fellow woman. In this same vein, the idea that bad actors would use a pandemic or a viral sort of virus to manipulate their way into positions of power, like the big heavy in this book, Randall Flagg, and negatively impact our world by misinforming the public and trying to manipulate people to follow them. That's definitely aged the best. We've seen so many people in the wake of the pandemic or at the height of the pandemic attempt to benefit and manipulate their way into positions of power, and many people succeeded in that range. Unfortunately, they rose in prominence in the discourse of American culture in the wake of the pandemic. And certainly, Randall Flagg is maybe the forefront guy of so much of that discourse and all of the negativity and the evil that these people who attempt to insert themselves into the vacuum that exists when human beings are in peril, in distress. So again, Stephen King nailing this element of humanity, nailing this element of American culture, that there are these sort of pseudo-celebrities, godlike figures who will rise to prominence and become more powerful in the wake of a global pandemic. Moving on to what's aged the worst. Things that feel dated or problematic now. Now listen, as much as I love Stephen King, my man is the king of some problematic stuff. Looking at you, It finale scene with all the kids having a orgy. Yeah, that happened in the books. No good. Problematic, to say the least. In this book, what I think is clearly aged the worst is what Stephen King often does in the way of like race-based dialogue, where he attempts to speak as if like an African-American person would speak, I guess you'd say. And it's very cringeworthy. It's horrible, frankly, and it has aged the worst. Again, Stephen King wrote this book in 1978, so I don't expect him to have this sort of cultural lens that we have now to reapproach some of that dialogue. But he also speaks frequently from the inside of a gentleman with intellectual disabilities head, and the way that he writes his dialogue, I think, is similarly aged pretty poorly. I just think it's just not good. I don't think it would be written that way if it was written today. But it's difficult to criticize some of this stuff in the context of 2026 because, listen, it was just written at a different time of the world. The other thing that's aged the worst, again, another sex thing, Stephen, naughty, no more, is a character, prominent character, has basically a whole section of the middle third of this book where he is unfortunately abused in a sexual way by a short Italian psychopath. Horrible scene. Not something I enjoyed at all. Something if I do reread this book, I'm never going to I'm going to skip right through it because I don't think it adds a whole lot to the story. But it is horrifying, it is scary, and it is traumatic. So I guess mission accomplished on that front. But I tend to think if you were cutting down this 1,200-page book, that probably doesn't make it in. That probably doesn't make it into this version of the book. I don't know. Stephen King's maybe horror legend, so maybe he has a different opinion than I do. But in my opinion, that one's getting cut if we re-edit this book today. In a lot of ways, the quintessential Stephen King thing is these horrendous sex scenes that stick with you and are horrifying to you. So I could live without that one. I could live without basically every Stephen King sex scene. None of them are particularly interesting or useful, I think. In general, they're just like, oh no, it's horrible. And I think some of that's the point, but generally, I wish that he didn't have them in here. Okay, next up, our Heat Check Award. This is an award for the Dion Waiters Heat Check Award. Dion Waiters is a basketball player who would frequently overestimate his abilities and take an all-time heat check shot, and sometimes he'd miss. More often than not, he would miss. And for this award, I had no choice but to give the award to Harold Lauder, the overweight writer nerd character who is essentially lusting the entire book for Franny, who is the main female protagonist of this book. He is just obsessed with her. He is really not a very cool guy. He has some sort of ownership complex over her, despite the fact that he never really had any romantic relationship with her. He just claims her because the two of them were left alone in their small town together and thinks that he can sort of lay claim to her as his woman. And the feeling's not mutual. Franny ultimately leaves him for Stu, and it's not good. Harold falls off the deep end and becomes a wackadoo. So generally, Harold thinking that he could pull Franny, ultimate heat check, man. You're a writer, you basically have no friends, you seem to be a social pariah, and he misses this shot. I mean, I know you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, but Harold is airballing this one, and ultimately that causes him to crash out and ruin his life and literally causes the deaths of multiple other characters. So Harold has to be this one. Secondary choice, and honestly, this may be the even better heat check here, is the character Julie Laurie, who is the sex-crazed teenager who, within the course of just a few minutes, sleeps with Nick Andros, the deaf character, and then tries to convince him to abandon his mentally disabled companion in Tom Cullen. And then when Nick catches on to what's happening, she runs off, gets a rifle, and tries to shoot them both. She's in the book for basically one chapter and like a little bit of an appearance later on, but man, she is throwing gas while she's there. She's just having sex, trying to make fun of the mentally disabled gentleman for no reason, because she's just cruel and psycho. And then she tries to shoot them both. So that's very cool and very normal from Julie Laurie. Ultimate heat check here. Okay, half blank internet research. This is just some light internet research about the book in general, the process of making the book. I had a couple selections here. First off, this was originally Stephen King's attempt at recreating the world of The Lord of the Rings. He has this quote where for about 10 years he's trying to write an American fantasy epic in the vein of Lord of the Rings. Then at some point he moves to Boulder, Colorado. So he wants to write Lord of the Rings. And what he ends up doing is basically making his version of Mordor in Las Vegas and having his Frodo be a Texan by the name of Stuart Redman. And I think the character most known from this book, most famous from this book, is the antagonist Randall Flagg, this evil, nefarious figure who looms over the entirety of the world. He's sort of this dark figure within everyone's nightmares and their dreams. He's haunting people. He is unbelievably evil. And he looms over Las Vegas. He controls Las Vegas. He is the Dark Lord of this series, the Darth Vader, the Darth Lord of this book. And generally, I don't love him as a character, but it's interesting to hear sort of what King was going for in putting together this world. King wanted Randall Flagg to be his Darth Vader. He wanted him to be his Dark Lord of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Next up, half blank internet research. King said that the Patty Hearst kidnapping and subsequent manhunt inspired this novel. Moreover, he also cited the song The Oyster Club's Don't Fear the Reaper as a heavy inspiration for this book. So Patty Hearst and Don't Fear the Reaper somehow combined to the stand. I don't know how he gets there, but that's why the man is a horror genius. Finally, the book was originally published in 1978 and then set in the 80s, in 1980. Then King published the paperback in 1980 and set it in 1985. Then King published the definitive edition with, I think, 400 more pages of story, which is the one that I read. Publishes that one in 1990 and sets it in the 90s. Now, I read the definitive uncut edition. It is very self-indulgent. It is very good, I think. I was really pulled in, but I do think the middle third of the book tends to drag. Probably, honestly, could have cut 400 pages here. If you're not a Stephen King diehard, it may be a bit much for you, but I could be saying if I read the original cut that I wanted 400 more pages of dialogue. But something just to think about, because if you are looking at which version to read, I think people generally recommend the uncut version, but it is a behemoth at 1,200 pages, so I don't know. I don't know if I would give it a 10 out of 10 recommend. Okay, let's talk about the apex mountain of this book. This is somebody for whom it never got better. Obviously, it's not Stephen King's apex mountain. I don't know, maybe The Shining is probably his apex mountain because he makes this book that is then turned into a movie and then obviously becomes a big, massive hit, cultural phenomenon, and he is cemented as this horror legend, as the man behind the book that inspired the movie. But it may have consideration for him as an author because it's apparently his best-selling book. I mean, the numbers sort of range on this one. I think the apex mountain would have to be Randall Flagg, the character here. He comes out of this as this sort of iconic villain of the literary world. People often who've read through King fiction, he recurs in that world, but he is sort of this iconic figure, one of King's more iconic villains, because he is so nefarious in this book, so evil, and just feels like such an unrelenting figure. And I'm not going to give a spoiler, but, you know, potentially unkillable, I don't know, maybe hard to read based on the ending, but maybe. Next up, best hang, worst hang. For this one, I think the best hang is pretty obvious. I'm going to go with Larry Underwood, the guy I mentioned before. Former musician. He's partying hard in Los Angeles before he comes back to New York. So hard that he forgets to pay his bills and, you know, do normal human being stuff. So maybe not the most responsible guy. Definitely not the most responsible guy. But definitely seems like a great hang. Like, I think the guy probably gets after it. Seems like a really fun guy to hang out with. And to grab a beer, for sure, Larry Underwood's my number one guy. I know he's maybe reformed in the days of the underworld, but guy seems cool. He's a party animal. He's a musician. He's hung out with some famous people. I think he'd have some good stories. Okay, worst hang. Similar vein. Nadine, the woman who Larry meets on the road on his trek to Boulder, who is taking care of this feral boy. Yeah, there's no other way to describe it. Feral young lad, and who is subsequently radicalized by Randall Flagg, the Dark Lord of this series. Nadine sucks. She's super annoying. She's terrible. She's a literal murderer by the end of the book. She's not nice to Larry, who is, you know, very cool guy and wants to date her for some reason. His puppy love sick over her. I would not want to hang out with her. I would not want to spend any time with her. Basically, the entire book, she's plotting something bad and nefarious, and then by the end of the book, you know, she's not there anymore. And I'm kind of like, good, you are the worst character, and I don't like you at all. So no beers for me and Nadine. I do not enjoy her company. She sucks. And, you know, I think there's really... Maybe I could choose Randall Flagg, who's basically the literal devil, but I would probably rather get a beer with the devil than Nadine, which says something about her. Okay, the Golden Compass Award for Is This Book Better Than the Movie? And the Golden Compass famously not, I mean, the book's better than the movie version with Daniel Craig. The movie's terrible. The Stand has never had an effective adaptation. I think everyone would generally agree with that, fans of the series. It's never really managed to nail what makes The Stand work, and for different reasons. I think that there's an exaggerated nature to the story that kind of plays poorly on television and in film. There was a television miniseries in the 90s that Stephen King wrote, and then there was a CBS All Access, which subsequently became Paramount Plus series that people absolutely despised. I haven't seen either of them, but they're generally regarded as very not good works. Okay, so our final segment here is probably unanswerable questions. And for this one, this is a full-on spoiler alert. Spoilers abundant here. Number one question. The book ends with a nuclear bomb going off in Las Vegas and killing Randall Flagg and a bunch of our heroes. My question is, did Glenn, Larry, and Ralph actually have to die? They go to Las Vegas to face off a Flagg, and they basically accomplish nothing. They get there, and essentially they're captured, and they're going to hang them in the village square, and then the trash can man comes in with this nuclear bomb and blows everybody up. The trash can man was going to do that regardless. So I don't know if there's some sort of idea that there is a holy force that is calling them there, and that sacrifice is what allows the trash can man to come and blow everything up. But that's kind of dumb to me. I think the ending's kind of a cop-out. I love the idea of a nuclear bomb going off and killing Randall Flagg. I enjoyed that. But like, the idea that these guys were basically robbed of any level of agency at the end of the story is very stupid to me. And I don't like that element of it. So did they have to die, I guess is the question? I think the answer is no. I think I know it, but I would love to know what the thinking is there. Secondary question, there's a big plot in this book, middle third, where Mother Abigail and the people in Boulder are sending these spies to spy on Randall Flagg. And did they actually achieve anything? Because they send 3 spies. 2 of them die while they're in custody with Randall Flagg. The third of them is Tom Cullen, who comes back and basically manages to save our hero, Stu Redman, who again, protagonist of the book, main hero, doesn't even get to be a part of the main climax of the book. He's dying on the side of the road while that's happening. Okay, whatever. Again, I have some qualms about how the book lands, but that's definitely one of them. None of the spies do anything. They don't get any information. So what was the purpose of that whole thing? I think the middle third of this book really drags, and I think this in particular is one that I just don't, it doesn't make any sense to me. Why? Why did you send these spies? It doesn't serve any purpose. Why was this storyline left in? Final unanswerable question. Why is Stephen King obsessed with local politics? I know, following Stephen King on Twitter for many years, and now Blue Sky or whatever other silly platform everyone's using, the guy does love politics. He's very involved in politics. It's great. It's all good. But my man spends about a third of this book straightforward, just talking about local politics, talking about forming societies, constitutions. It's very, you know, I don't know why we're doing it. Frankly, it seems a little silly. And I think the middle third, again, of this book is not good. It very much drags between the world ending and them fighting the evil forces. There is this whole third where they're like rebuilding society in Boulder, and, you know, generally miss me with that. I'm never going to dive back into that element of it again because it drags, I guess. I mean, they're talking excruciating detail with the voting blocks of a town hall meeting. I mean, the world ended, dude. Why don't we talk about why the world ended and figure out what's going to happen next? I mean, there's some interesting conversation to be had, but why is Stephen King so into local politics is my final unanswerable question. Okay, so at the end of all these videos, I'm going to give a rereadability score. My rereadability score on this one is going to be a 3. 3. That's it. That feels generous. Very hard for me to recommend this book with any sort of real zeal because it's 1,200 pages. It's 1,200 freaking pages. It's a long time. It takes you forever. It took me a month to read. And I have a child. I have a life. I have a job. I can't just be ripping 1,200 pages. It's not a very rereadable book. And frankly, if I did reread it, I'd probably go with a smaller book. If it's your first time reading the series, if it's the first time you're reading Stephen King, probably worth it. Probably worth checking out. I think I'm glad that I read this as a part of Stephen King's bibliography, as a part of his general. I'm glad that I read The Stand because it is such a seminal text in the Stephen King sort of hagiography, Stephen King history, but it's not for me. It's not my favorite book. It's not even in my probably top 5 King books. I didn't love it the same way I did a lot of his other texts, though I do think there is probably a lot more to unpack with this book than some of his lighter reads, some of his more flimsy texts. So I'm going to give The Stand a 3 out of 10 on the rereadability score. Worth reading if you are somebody who loves Stephen King. Worth reading if you are somebody who likes post-apocalyptic fiction because it is sort of a gold standard bearer in that realm. Okay, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more of these videos. Until later, I will talk to you guys soon. Bye now.